Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate and Ridge Lending Group.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Hey, welcome to GRE. This is the always valuable Get Rich Education, episode 72. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. This is the show that's built your wealth and changed how you invest. Thanks for tuning in from wherever you're listening, and now heard in 155 world nations through iTunes, iHeartRadio, the GRE Android app, Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Castro, Overcast, Pocket Casts, and you can even listen at GetRichEducation.com. Now, back in episode 22, we did a show on how to best select and interview a property manager for yourself. Today, our guest and I are discussing how you best manage your property manager over the years during your lifetime of income property ownership. Today, I am in Miami, Florida, as I prepare to set sail on the Real Estate Guys Investor Summit at Sea Cruise. Now, building wealth, really, it often comes down to when you start unlearning as much as it does when you start learning. Okay, you need to unlearn the old before you learn the new. It comes down to really when you decided to stop believing these outdated old economy notions that are actually preventing you from building your wealth. You know what the problem is and why people don't ever create enough wealth to enjoy the lifestyle and the freedom that they really want? Okay, and we're going to get really concrete here, all right? Now, it's things like this, all right? What it is they believe the same old outdated thing for so long, well, that they figure, well, then these kind of old economy, scarcity mindset, middle-class ideas, since they have been around so long, they just figure it's got to be true then, okay? Because they believe them for so long. Well, they figure it must be true if they've been hearing this so much in their life. Well, they're wrong, okay? Here's an example of what I'm talking about, all right? People are told your 401k is a great investment. I'm here to tell you no, it's definitively not. It will not create wealth for you. Now, it might, just might, give you enough for an okay retirement, okay? A retirement where when you're 65, okay, you can start maybe going on one great vacation a year, only if you skimp and save and resign yourself to eating Marie Callender's microwave pot pies regularly, okay? I mean, who wants to merely survive when you can so easily thrive? Look, here's what a great investment does. It pays you every month. Well, then a 401k is completely backwards, okay? Instead, you're paying a 401k every month. That's the direct opposite of what a great investment should do for you. 401k, I mean, a great investment pays you every month when you're young and when you're old, okay? You don't instead pay it. If you have any interest in getting ahead, a 401k is a terrible idea. All right, you want to hear a second myth? Another one of these notions of yesteryear where the middle class still believes they're going to get wealthy somehow? Okay, here it is. They say, my goal is to get more of my money working for me. Yep, let's get my money working for me. I mean, what could be better than that, right? Well, you know what? That's something your friend says that's never going to get ahead, okay? You know better, right? I mean, why in the world do you think your best and highest investment dollars are to get dollars to work for you? I'm telling you, if you're only getting your money to work for you, you are really missing out. When you do what we do here at Get Rich Education for 72 episodes now, is you use a scant few of your dollars to get massive amounts of other people's dollars working for you. Now, that's when you get ahead. And you do it without exploiting anyone. That's how wealth is created. That is thrive mode, not survive mode. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a moment. But first of all, here's a third old economy notion that still persists among people today. And this has got to stop, okay? This stuff has just got to stop. And actually, you know what? This is I'll give the investing quote that none other than Albert Einstein contributed to the world. I'll tell you that Einstein is wrong on this one. All right, here we go. And this is totally unimpressive, Albert Einstein. This even approaches false, okay? Here's his quote. Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Not impressed, Einstein. Compound interest cannot be the eighth wonder of the world. What about leverage? Yes, financial leverage, which is effectively using other people's money ethically for your gain, Albert Einstein. Compound interest, that's where over time, not only your principal earns interest, but your interest also earns interest. Well, fine, but that pales in its wealth magnification ability as compared to leverage. Look, some quick math to help me make my point here, all right? Let's compare. With compound interest, take a $100,000 stock investment and a 10% annual gain. After 1 year, you have $110K. After 2 years, it's not just $120K, but it's $121K because interest begins accruing on the interest as well as the principal. After 3 years, you have about $133K, okay? So over 3 years, that's a 33% gain on your initial investment, or therefore it's about 11% per year, okay? So an 11% annual return with compound interest. Let's remember that, 11%. Now let's compare that to the use of leverage. With a 20% down payment on a $100,000 income property, you've only got $20K invested in the property, but you've had the ability to borrow the other $80K from the bank. Other people's money, the banks. So with 10% annual appreciation gains on the real estate, your $100K property over 3 years is now $133K, so it experienced the same growth as our stock example. But here's the big difference. Your $33K gain was leveraged with only your $20K down payment that you put into the deal. Okay, so you only have $20K invested in the deal. You got to use both that $20K plus leverage the $80K from the bank. So your gain is on both your money and the bank's money. So your $33,000 gain is divided by your down payment of only $20K. That's a 165% ROI on your $20K down payment divided by your 3 years. That's about a 55% ROI per annum. 55 with leverage. So over 3 years, you've got an 11% annual ROI with Einstein's compound interest versus a 55% ROI with leverage. So sorry, Einstein, in investing, leverage might be the eighth wonder of the world, but it is not compound interest, okay? In this simplified example, it just beat compound interest by a score of 55% to 11%. Leverage beat compound interest fivefold. And we're not even getting into how the income real estate simultaneously pays you every month with other people's money again, the tenant's money, or how that tenant also covers the $80K of loan servicing for you from your loan. Einstein was around 100 years ago. This is today. This is how you're going to prosper in today's economy. So these three outdated notions like save money for the long term and a 401k, terrible, geez. Get your money to work for you, not impressive. And still getting excited about compound interest? I mean, geez, this stuff is old, worn out, scarcity-minded, and it's a middle-class paradigm at best. And they're probably things that your friend still thinks, okay? And that's why he's not getting ahead and why he's going to work and continue to sell massive amounts of his time for money most of his life. Going through life trading his time for dollars. He's going to spin his wheels for decades just because he refuses to believe anything else, because what he has believed in is what he's believed for so long, so he'll just keep believing it. That is called the opportunity cost of having a closed mind, and that results in the tragedy of living below your means. Don't live a day below your means when you could just as well use those same thoughts and efforts to instead expand your means, okay? but you don't want to spend your time managing that rental property in the example. You don't want to spend your time managing that property that secures the leverage or the income stream, okay? Or else you're just losing your time and you've created another job for yourself. So today's show topic is about how you manage and deal with and communicate with your property manager when you're the investor. So, yes, I am in balmy South Florida today with, I think there are supposed to be about 140 of us investors here for the Real Estate Guys Investor Summit at Sea. I don't know what the official attendance or count is here yet. After a couple days of classes on land here, we're all getting on a cruise ship for a week of fun, sun, educational learning. And we're also going to make land excursions in Cozumel, Grand Cayman, Jamaica, and the Bahamas before we return back here to Miami about 10 days from now. So among the 140 or however many of us, there will be some prominent investors that I'm going to get to spend some significant time with, including Robert Kiyosaki, whom is here with us. He's the #1 selling personal finance author of all time. He's the Rich Dad Poor Dad author. Now, I recorded today's interview portion when I was back in Anchorage, Alaska. A few years ago in Anchorage, I attended the local real estate investor meeting. It's called the Real Estate Exchange, or the REX, or the REX. And I was wowed by the guest presenters one particular night. They were Kassandra and Eric Boltman, a very savvy husband and wife team that owns the Real Property Management Last Frontier franchise. The Boltmans seemingly had an accurate, pointed answer for every off-the-wall question that the investors in attendance asked them that night. Kassandra later went on to become a published author. She is an investor herself, in addition to owning her property, which professionally manages hundreds of rental units back in Anchorage. For a while, I thought, gosh, wouldn't Kassandra be a great guest on Get Rich Education? So I'm pleased to have her on the show today. It's the first time she's ever done a show like this as well. One thing you're going to see today, and it really makes sense to have a manager that is an investor themselves like Kassandra. She understands both sides very well, the investor side and the manager side. I'm grateful to have had a lot of success in real estate, but yet, when people ask me what I would have done differently to make it even better if I could go back in time, it is that I would have bought more property. I would have bought property sooner. And the third thing is I also regret self-managing for too long. I managed my own properties for 5.5 years, when instead just 1 to 2 years of self-managing those 8 units I owned back near the beginning, that would have been enough for me to learn the lessons and understand management from the inside well enough. Okay, I self-managed too long. I could have better spent that time learning how to be a better investor. That's where the real wealth is made. It is not in long-term self-management. Property managers do so much more than just collect the rent. They deal directly with prospects and tenants. They market your rentals, collect the rent, handle the maintenance, handle repairs, respond to tenant complaints, pursue evictions. They keep apprised of the local landlord and tenant laws. They interface with the utility companies. They expedite your taxes and your bookkeeping. They handle your security deposit accounts. And their property management fees are typically tax deductible for you too. So let's learn about how to manage your property manager with our guest. Today's guest started investing in real estate at the age of 18. She's now a multi-state investor in Texas, Oklahoma, and Alaska. She's the owner of single-family homes up to multifamilies herself, and she's involved in syndicated apartment deals. In 2014, she published an excellent book, which I actually own, called Pain or Profit. That's available both in ebook and in print. She considers herself a rich dad student, just like a lot of you and me myself. Today, she co-owns one of the largest property management companies in the state of Alaska. She and her husband are the sole owners of that franchise location, and they're consistently a top performer of Real Property Management's 268 franchise locations. She's on the board of a nonprofit that does seminars throughout the year to educate the community about real estate investments. And she's got a number of different management styles, a really strong knowledge base, and her creative techniques have made her pretty well known in her local market and in other real property management franchises throughout the U.S. and Canada. Welcome to Get Rich Education, Kassandra Boltman.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite. It's an honor to be here today. I'm excited to share the knowledge and I'm excited to help others.
It's great that you're here, our first local guest.
Thank you.
Tell us about how you started in real estate. You started so young. Tell us about that.
I actually consider myself a little lucky. I grew up in the business. So my grandfather did it. He had rentals, and then my father is a land developer and owns businesses as well. So I kind of grew up in it, and that is all that I know is rentals. So when I turned, I believe I was 12, I was already replacing roofs and kick out evictions and cleaning up properties. And when I turned 14, I knew I had to have a property at 18. So 4 months after I turned 18, I closed on my first property and rented out all the rooms. And that paid for my college. So it's a wonderful adventure. So, and it led up all the way to today, where my goal is to raise the standards of local management here in town, as well as spread the word nationally about property management and the tips and the tricks and the science of all of it.
Listeners, don't you wish you started investing in real estate as 18? That is fantastic. For a lot of us, Kassandra, a lot of us investors, and I think maybe the one thing that holds some people back from being real estate investors is as soon as they learn that deals don't make any sense in their local market, they learn about other attractive geographic markets that make sense to them as far as from having a good proportion of rent income to purchase price and all those important investor metrics. But the one thing that holds them back is I don't know that I trust any manager out there to manage my property, and they don't look into it any further, and that's one big holdup. So, why don't we start a little bit with just exactly what do property managers do?
Property managers, their sole goal is to take the stress out of management for investors. Now, there's some good ones out there and there's some bad ones, but the ones that are really good, they understand, they're trained, they're experienced in the science of putting it all together to make something happen.
So we're talking about all of those things. You go ahead and you have your interface with your vendors and your utility companies, and you're the one collecting the rent and so on. What are some of those other things that you do?
There's plenty to do, and a lot of people think it's just simply collecting a rent check, but a good manager understands the balance of loan management, escrows, budgets, technology. You always have to add technology to make things quicker and faster. And not only that, they have to have the whole accounting piece, because you got to have escrow and reserve items and budgets. If you don't put all those things together beautifully, it's going to make it a painful investment.
Yeah, it's really a dizzying amount of stuff to do. I mean, property managers spin so many plates. Now, just dropping back for a moment, we mentioned that you co-own with Eric, your husband, a franchise, a real property management franchise. I think a lot of people think about property management firms as kind of a mom and pop firm, and that out-of-state investor might try to learn a little bit about that company's culture or just how they operate. But is there anything that gives an advantage with a franchise, real property management franchise, 268 or so franchises across the nation? I mean, what kind of advantages does a franchise give over a mom and pop shop?
Oh, sure. Mom and pops are very experienced and they have lots of stories to tell and several years of management underneath their belt. However, they hold on to what worked before, not what works now. Real property management, it's a group of people that manage over 10,000 properties in over 260 locations just in the United States. Collectively, we collaborate frequently on the most innovative processes, technologies, and systems where we're consistently reaching out and questioning the old ways in order to be better, faster, quicker, and solving daily problems. So an example, this last year, we were very innovative and found special MLS lockboxes, which we determined rents properties 33% faster. We also came up with new technology where we can communicate with our customers all over the world. So locally, we manage over 500 rentals right now. I believe out of the 500 rentals, only 6 owners actually live in Alaska. The rest live all over the world, Thailand, Germany, and it keeps going. And we're able to communicate with them and have meetings with them like they're here with us. So they can be a part of this, all because real property management was able to cultivate it through technology and resources that mom and pops can't do.
All right, you touched on something a little bit interesting with the MLS lockboxes. What was that? That helps get places rented 33% faster. How does that work?
So what's special about those is, how real estate agents have MLS lockboxes? Well, we can do that too with rentals. So with these MLS boxes, other real estate agents can show their properties for us. So let's say you're a real estate person, you normally do sales, but you have a client you want to help out. They're willing to show our rental properties to get a fee, which helps it make it where we have more boots on the ground showing properties. Another thing that's really special about this lockbox is that Tenants can show themselves in properties and schedule appointments online without ever having to call us. So they're not having to play phone tag with us. In the middle of summer, we average 200 to 300 calls a day.
Huh.
So having technology help with that volume makes it where we can run things faster just because it avoids a phone call and, back and forth and trying to schedule and, oh, I'm booked on this day and this time. It just makes it quicker.
Right. So they've got that ease of access. You just get that many more showings, which means you get places rented that much faster.
Correct. And what's really cool about this program is it makes us attract technology-friendly tenants, which, as you know, millennials are coming up in the environment, and that's what they want. They don't want to pick on the phone and call us anymore. They want to chat with us on the internet, and they want to electronically communicate with us. So we're now able to cater towards that upcoming generation.
Over the long term, after an investor has already chosen a property manager, what are some of the better ways, in your opinion, since you've been on both sides, you are an investor and you are a manager, what are some of the best ways for an investor to manage the property manager over the longer term?
The best advice I can give anyone is that investors are, in essence, they're a manager of a team. So the investor needs to set meetings and goals and be clear about what metrics matter to them and what metrics they're measuring us on in order to achieve their goal, whatever that goal may be. Because the property manager knows the tips and the tricks and the techniques to make that measure goal happen. But if you don't communicate to us, we're not going to be able to hit your goal. And if you have a good property manager, you're not going to have to micromanage us. You just need to set clear expectations. So some properties need to meet yearly, quarterly, monthly. It depends on what goals are going on and what activities are happening in that time period. So here's an example. Owner wants to prep a property to be sold in 5 years. So we need to reconsider changing how we do inspections, reconsider how we look at accounting, review taxes, and the leases. So by simply changing the inspections, we can reduce surprises when it's coming up for a sell. We need to make accounting adjustments so we can improve the cap rates for a potential buyer. We also need to review lease expiration dates so we can stagger them so an FHA VA buyer has the ability to buy the property. All these put together will save thousands, and it'll allow you as the investor to put your best foot forward. But that only happens when you start the conversation and hold us to meetings and explain the goals.
So to get with some examples further, say if that investor has, I think you brought up a 5-year hold, you probably are going to want to make some accounting adjustments. You probably are going to want to get, if it's a multifamily building, especially where that multifamily building is valued on the net operating income of that building, you're probably trying more aggressively to get rent increases for that 5-year hold investor in year 4, in year 5, when they're trying to sell.
That's a very good example, and it all depends on what the goal is. Because remember, let me back up for a second. Remember how Robert Kiyosaki talks about there's 4 reasons why to buy a property? It's tax savings, appreciation, equity, or taxes.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you buy a property, it's to do a tax play, or it's to do an appreciation play where you can flip it in so many years, or it's just to make equity go down so you can do a 1031 later. But if you don't communicate that goal to us and set a strategy that honors that goal, we're going to miss the boat and look like a bad property manager.
Do you have an example of where someone, for tax reasons, where for an investor, they might have a certain expectation such that there are some things that you will want to make capital improvements and other things that you will try to steer toward repairs that can all be written off in the same year?
Correct. I have a particular owner right now who bought a series of properties and they're doing a retirement plan. And in that retirement plan, it makes it to where for the first 2 years of owning these properties, we're allowed to do a lot of CapEx repairs. And the CapEx repairs that we need to choose from need to make it to where the property will hold for 20 years with little tax hit and high cash flow. So we'll do a lot of CapEx repairs. So like we took one building and we rehabbed all the units with $20,000 budgets on each unit, but those units will not have a maintenance hit later in his retirement years. Those units will not have a huge CapEx repair later when he's in retirement mode. So he wanted to dump money now because he's in a high income bracket, but later he won't and he wants the cash.
See, these are a lot of things that investors aren't even thinking about when it comes to going ahead and communicating with their manager. And it all comes back to you, listener. Like I've said before with real estate investing, the most important thing in real estate investing is you. What are your expectations? The market team and the property only come after you. So knowing who you are and knowing what you want is really going to help. Now, one thing, Kassandra, that long-term investors have in properties out of market, out of their geographic market, is I want to be sure that my property is being taken care of while it's being held onto. I mean, how can I ensure that it's being taken care of? And one of those things is you're going to want to be sure that your manager goes inside your property at least every once in a while to do a routine inspection. I mean, say a tenant has lived there for a while and there's no one from the management team that's been inside the unit for a whole year. How do you go about motivating that property manager to get inside the unit and see that everything's okay? For example, that a tenant is just not telling you about a small water leak that's slowly damaging the walls and seeping down into the floors. I mean, as an investor, you can kind of go ahead and check your monthly water usage in the bills that you get from the property manager and kind of see what your usage has been. But I guess, how do you advise someone as an investor to help motivate the manager to get in there and do those routine inspections? And is that reasonable to ask?
It is completely reasonable to ask. So there's kind of three ways to check a manager to make sure that they're doing things and being proactive in things. One, you as an investor, you're supposed to be looking at your profit and loss reports and looking for trends. Is that water bill going up? Is that gas bill going up? Did it go up because of rate increases, or did it go up because we're starting to have mismanagement issues? Another area that you can use to try to manage the manager with inspections is a good one that I do with some of my big investors is we'll actually do that property inspection from an actual inspector once every 5 years or once every 10 years. It does two things. It allows us to create the escrow budget so we can plan for upcoming repairs. The other one is that it's a good way to inspect the manager to make sure they're coming up with it and keeping up with it and hitting the goals and not getting delayed on something or refocusing them. And then the third one is you can just simply ask that I want inspections on a certain time period and I want pictures and a full detailed report every time you do it. So some of my accounts, they want them once a year. Some of my accounts want it every quarter. It depends on the goal of the property and, of course, the budget of the property. And usually when trust is developed and that we're on the same page, those inspections can start going away or they can be increased to monitor.
A lot of this is called property management. That's the name of this discipline. That's what it's known as. But I sometimes joke that, boy, it really ought to be called tenant management. So, starting with the property manager screening, how do you get tenants to treat an investor's property with respect over the long term so that you know it's being taken care of?
That one's a fun topic in its own. So I'd like to kind of back up to a story. So we were in an interview for a 15-plex to manage it, and rents were dropping, the maintenance costs were increasing through the roof, and basically the profits had disappeared. So they were looking for new management because they couldn't figure out what was going on and where the problems were. So after reviewing the numbers, we ended up making a strategy. So what we did is we went and said, okay, we're going to do all the delayed repairs. And we're going to bump rents accordingly to the delayed repairs that are getting done. Then we're going to pick out the bad tenants and kick them out. So what started to happen is the tenant mix went from drugs, cops showing up, broken down cars, and diapers on the sidewalks, to retirees wanting a required environment, nurses that just started their first job, or a guy who just went through a divorce and needs a place to stay, cheap place that's quiet while they get things turned around. So simply focusing on the tenant mix in a building can be the first layer of attack with trying to get tenants to treat the property respect and as well get respect, if that makes sense. And one other way that you can do this is, in order to treat tenants with respect, you can sit there and give them a lease renewal 90 days ahead of time and say, hey, you know what? You're a great tenant. We want to extend the offer for you to stay another year. We'd love you to stay another year. Maybe I can paint a wall or give you that stove, something that'll upgrade and increase the value of the property, but at the same time make the tenant feel like it's a home. And you can ask them which item they want and give them a list. And then they'll sign a lease in a hurry and get that new item and stay longer. Because the most expensive thing that happens is a turn. And we want to avoid a turn. And we want tenants happy. And when they're happy, they're most respectful of the property.
Yeah, that's a great point, because thinking about tenant psychology, a lot of times a tenant thinks, geez, what am I paying rent for? Is this really worth it? I'm just throwing away money every month. And they're much more likely to want to stick with that manager when they feel like that manager's doing something for them and repainting their kitchen. And yeah, when you do it 90 days beforehand, they probably don't have enough time to give notice and they might just stay.
Correct. It's getting ahead of the problem. Kind of another thing that happens is when you do a study of all the tenants of why they leave a property and why they show landlords with disrespect, it's because they feel like they're not getting the bang for their buck and maintenance isn't happening and it's not happening timely. Those are kind of the top 3 based on studies and surveys that we've done. So when you fix those 3 things and you create a budget that can support those 3 things, it naturally starts fixing. And the next thing you know, you're turning a profit.
Yeah, and that's definitely a way to go ahead and extend the olive branch, especially if after their 12-month lease, the rent is going to be increasing 5% for the following year.
And I have properties now where we will give them a stove, rate increase $100. I done one where it was a $300 increase. And they turned around and said, thank you. I love staying under you guys. You're my best landlords. Signed a lease and kept renewing for 4 more years. So it's completely possible to get really good tenants that won't have a turn issue if you just give them a little love. And in return, they're just going to give you a little love back.
Right. And it's improving the building that the investor owns at the same time anyway. So it's helping them out. And it's also most likely to be a tax deductible expense all at the same time.
You got 4 points. So you're making decisions around that 4 points and it'll create retention, which is cash flow, taxes, appreciation, or equity.
Proactivity and retention are huge terms toward being profitable. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Kassandra Boltman. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Would you like to be able to finance up to 35 income properties and all with one lender? Ridge Lending Group specializes in investment property loans, and they do it in almost every U.S. state. Ridge has worked with tens of thousands of real estate investors and homeowners all over the country. And check this out. At this point, they've helped more families realize their dreams of becoming real estate investors than any other mortgage lender in the country. To find out more, visit ridgelendinggroup.com.
Are you looking for a roadmap to financial freedom? If so, we have a solution for you. Norada Real Estate is offering a limited number of free strategy sessions to help you get out of the rat race. Learn how you can create wealth and build monthly passive income. To set up a time with one of our knowledgeable investment counselors, simply go to noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
This is Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our guest, co-owner of Real Property Management Last Frontier, Kassandra Boltman. So, Kassandra, there really is a 2-tier structure for most property management companies in the United States. That is a 2-tier fee structure. One common property manager fee is there's something called a management fee. That could often be 6 to 10% of the gross rent amount is what a manager is going to take every month in that management fee. And then a second fee is something called a leasing fee. And a common structure for the leasing fee is that property manager is going to take 1/2 of a month's rent up to maybe 1 month's rent every time they place a tenant. That's what their fee is going to be. So some investors are concerned that, like, well, wait, with that common structure, now a property manager is incentivized to try to get as much turnover as they can so that they can get that leasing fee of 1/2 months to 1 month's rent as often as they possibly can. Well, if they're incentivized to maximize turns, that's not good for me as the investor because turnover is very costly. That entails vacancy, that often entails some repairs and some advertising and some screening and so on. So that seems to be a common red flag that managers might be trying to increase their profits that way. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, it's very common where I ran across a situation where the tenant was placed into the property with the rent being $300 lower than market, and they were placed in the winter months. And then 6 months later, they went and raised the rates by $500. So keep in mind, that's $200 over market. And then, of course, the tenant wanted to vacate, which created the vacancy. And then, of course, the management company is going to get a couple benefits. They're going to get 2 turn fees in a year. Then they're going to get their maintenance fees out of it. And then they're going to say, oh, it's because your property isn't good. We need to do all these upgrades. So when you're looking at your management contract and you're trying to have that conversation on a yearly basis or before you pick your manager, you want to understand what motivates them, what drives them, and what they're targeting. Like with our company, we always want a happy, long tenant. That is our goal in everything that we do. Whereas some companies are incentivized just a turn, because they make more of their money in the turns than they do just keeping happy long-term tenants. So you have to make sure you understand what motivates them, what their procedures are supporting, or you're going to get hurt.
Yeah, it's definitely a short-term mentality. I mean, my gosh, in that example you gave, hopefully that was that person's ex-manager immediately.
Very quickly.
Any other red flags out there that an investor might look for in their manager where their manager's trying to increase their profits while hurting the investor at the same time? Where's another potential place to look?
Maintenance is a big one. Sometimes you want to be wary of a company who does 100% maintenance in-house. The reason why is you have to remember plumbers require certifications. So if you have an in-house maintenance inside of a full-service management company, are those guys getting recertified? Are those guys keeping up on their certification? Is that really what you want managing your property? So sometimes it's a healthy balance to go with a company who has a little bit in-house, a little bit outsourced. So the experts are outsourced, but the stuff that you need in-house to be agile to change a little light bulb, for example, isn't going to become a $200 bill. So you have to make sure that the structure of the company you're hiring suits the purposes of what you're looking for.
A lot of this comes down to occupancy. If you've got a good occupancy rate and the tenant's treating your property with respect, you're most likely to have a pretty successful investment as long as you bought right. So, how to increase that occupancy and minimize that vacancy? So, when a property's vacant, is there any way the investor help the manager get it rented faster, or at least identify when they know that their manager is probably just being lax and not getting a place rented as quickly as they can? I mean, what are some of the signs you can identify to hedge against that?
Sure. There's two common areas that you can use as an investor to manage the manager. One is asking for frequent updates as to how many calls are you getting, how many showings are you getting, why is it not getting rented? A story I have was when there was a person who called me and they had a townhome, which is mid-market, B-rated property, and it should have rented within days. But they had that on the market 6 months. And then, so he got frustrated. He finally called somebody else. I considered him to be super patient for him to wait 6 months, but he finally called us. We walked through the property and said, "Did anybody ever give you advice as to why it's not renting?" "Well, no. All you need to do is paint 2 walls. It would have cost less than $300. And it got rented within days when we did that. So sometimes you need to manage the manager and say, "I need my updates on a weekly basis when it is vacant." So that way we can gauge if we need to do an upgrade or a repair that's reasonable to get it rented quickly.
The first time I ever hired a property management firm in my life, I kissed the frog until I found the right one. And thank goodness I've been with the right one for a while. And, the last straw for why I had to get rid of my first property manager is I learned that they weren't adequately preparing a unit to be showed to the next person, yet they had been advertising that vacant unit at the same time, and they thought that they were done. Well, I wouldn't even want to rent a place to a tenant that would accept yellow walls or a door that didn't even close properly to the exterior of the building. So one of those red flags is just not adequately preparing a place between tenants, because that shows neglect on their part, and it also shows that they hardly care about the tenant quality that they're going to get when they come in there next, and the property is just going to continue to degrade that way.
That's correct. Because if you're not managing the manager to get those reports to figure out if they're on it, and if you're not giving them the budget to be able to approve those repairs and do minor upgrades that do need to happen over time, you're not going to be able to rent it fast enough. And you can't say shame on the property manager. It's really kind of shame on you because you weren't managing them.
Yeah, and today it's easier to invest remotely than it's ever been. Everyone has a good video app on their phone, and you can just ask your manager's leasing agent, "Hey, next time you're over there, just do a quick 30-second walkthrough video of my property and send it to me."
Yeah, so that way I can approve repairs or give you some ideas of upgrades I'm willing to do. That's an easy way of doing it. And we actually do that with our inspections. Our inspections have all these detailed pictures. And if you go to our website, you see these beautiful wide angle camera pictures. So you can also look at what's being advertised. So you're checking to see if they're even doing aggressive marketing plans. Because a lot of failures I see is that they're not doing repairs, they're not doing upgrades, and they're not marketing the property appropriately.
Yeah, I love the world these days. Everything is rather transparent, accessible, and can move at a faster speed. And if someone's doing wrong out there, there's just no hiding like there used to be.
No, there's not.
These are great things for retention and keeping a property in good condition, but you touched on it a little bit as far as ways for an investor to add value to their property. I mean, what do you think for an investor are some common actionable ways that managers can add value to an investor's property and make it such that they're adding value in a way that's not just an expense to the investor, but it's actually profitable for that investor over the long term?
Something that a manager or an investor can do for a manager is to make sure that the company that they hired is keeping up with the change of times. For example, the type of tenants I attracted and the type of tenants I tried to please 5 years ago is not the same type of tenants I have to cater towards now. So, for example, retirees weren't renting as much as they are now because they're having to sell off their homes in order to travel or to take care of retirement issues. Now we have millennials that are requiring that we report positive credit behaviors on their credit reports so they can buy houses or move all over the United States, or be friendly towards technology so they can have their technology components that they want in the house, like their tablets and iPhones, and be able to switch a light on and off with their phones.
Yeah.
So some of the things that you have to be careful of is you may have had a manager that's really good today, but they're not going to be good in the future because they haven't kept up with times and they haven't catered that with trying to attract long-term good tenants and the new tenants that are now in the workforce.
One potential way to cut down on a property vacancy and go ahead and increase returns for that investor is to have that higher occupancy rate. And if a property is slow to move onto the market to bring a new renter in, one way that a landlord might entice a tenant to fill that is by allowing pets, where previously they had not allowed pets. And, there are so many it depends factors with pets as far as the vibrancy of the market and the type of the property and all that. But just in general, really, what are some of the best pet policies as far as handling tenant pets for the investor?
A good way to think of pets is think of it this way. As the risk becomes higher, you raise the price. As the risk becomes lower, you can lower the price. But you can charge. That's the good part is nowadays you can charge for pets. So you can say a monthly rent is what you want to charge with an increase in the security deposit. But then start doing things to lower the risk, such as I want vet records. Are they chipped? Are they fixed? Are they declawed? And by doing that, will increase how many tenants will apply to your property. But the good news is you can now charge accordingly to the level of risk. And then you want to look at your building and decide how many units are allowed to have them or not, so you don't open the doors to other problems like too much dog poo in the yard.
Yeah, because especially in a multifamily building, that trickles down to others. If you're not allowing pets in some units and you bring in a new tenant where they're able to have a pet for another unit, that might offend some of those existing longer term tenants that weren't allowed to have pets, and now you've got yourself a problem.
Correct. You have to be very mindful of what you're doing with new tenants versus old tenants, especially when it comes to the rent price and if pets are allowed or not allowed and what kind.
Now, generally, that's going to vary state to state as far as how much additional you can charge for a pet, or whether you do that and or charge a pet deposit that's refundable or non-refundable. What do you see across states as far as those policies that are like allowed and disallowed?
Sure. The good news is I'm finding that it's pretty okay to charge $50 to $100 a month per pet. There are a couple states where they're like $25 and $30, and that's on monthly rent. On the security deposit, some of the RPM offices will charge anywhere from $500 to $1,000 per pet, but most of them statewide charge anywhere from $250 to $500 per pet on the security deposit side. Some offices will make it a fee. Some offices will make it a deposit. So you have to be very careful with your words, because if you start using the word deposit, you have to make it refundable. If you use the word fee, you can use it towards your revenue for your property.
Okay, that's a great distinction to make there. Well, as we're winding down here, Kassandra, any last things that you have as far as good strategies just for maybe on a month-to-month basis? Not that an investor is going to go ahead and communicate with their manager every month necessarily, but just any other like good communication techniques or sort of soft communication skills that an investor can use to best manage their manager?
My favorite is reports. So if you have a standard of reports that you understand and know how to read, it's going to help you manage them. For example, my favorite is the profit and loss because I love seeing trends. My second favorite is the rent roll, so I can constantly remember when that lease expires. And then the last one that I appreciate is kind of a summary of the work orders going on. So that way I can see if work orders have been increasing for a building and it's just becoming an old building, or if there's not enough work orders and we're worried that that tenant's not turning in anything and they're too quiet. But those three sets of reports are the common ones that I recommend all of my owners to at least monitor and watch and give feedback to.
Yeah, I scan all of my reports every month and look for those same trends and see where I might have had too many repair bills, or sometimes require repair bills that I need to question, where a tenant moved out that month and I know that there were holes in the walls. And I've got to ask why I was charged for those holes in the walls and why the holes in the walls did not come out of that tenant's security deposit. I mean, that might be a common example of something that I see.
That's an excellent example. It makes it to where you can see if the accounting department really is back billing or not.
Well, hey, Kassandra, this has been great. I think you really helped making investors more comfortable with investing, and at least they know some questions that they need to ask. How can our audience find out more about you?
My website is rpmlastfrontier.com, and you can reach me through the website. I do speaking engagements all over the place, so you're welcome to reach out to me through that. My direct extension is the 907-268-4776, or you can email me at Kassandra@rpmlastfrontier.com, and that's Kassandra with a K, by the way.
Okay, well, besides Kassandra being a very competent manager and running a successful company with her husband, she's also a really good resource. If you just want to get started in real estate investing, she can definitely steer you to a lot of the right resources. Kassandra Boltman, thanks so much for coming on to Get Rich Education today.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Valuable takeaways from Kassandra Boltman there. All right, well, I am soon going to board this cruise ship for the Investor Summit at Sea, as in a few hours, we're going to head off onto the Caribbean. Now, I've paid about $10,000 to attend this event, and I consider this the highest-end real estate investing event in the world. In a few weeks here on the show, I plan to give away some of my best takeaways from this cruise, just in case you didn't have the 10 days and 10K to spend here. Now, before I left home the other day, I also got to catch up once again with Rich Dad Tax Advisor Tom Wheelwright for a great chat, so I expect to air that show for you next week. Tom is perhaps the only person in the entire world that actually makes taxes fun. Boy, that takes some talent. Hey, special thanks to the talented and enterprising Kassandra Boltman today. Until next time, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
I mean, be a manager yourself for a year or two, and you will begin to lose faith in humanity.